First is the Chinese Civil War. The Chinese Civil War, a major conflict in China's modern history, was primarily between two forces, the Kuomintang (KMT), the ruling party of the Republic of China, and the Chinese Communist Party (CCP). This prolonged battle for control unfolded in stages from August 1, 1927, until the Communists emerged victorious on December 7, 1949. The war began after the breakdown of a brief alliance between the KMT and the CCP during the Northern Expedition, aiming to unify China under KMT leadership. By 1937, the KMT had control over most of the country. However, the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937-1945, forced both parties to shift focus. During this period, the KMT and CP formed the Second United Front to resist the Japanese invasion, although tensions and skirmishes between them continued. Further complicating matters, Japan established the Wang Jingwei regime, a puppet government that claimed to rule occupied Chinese territories. After World War II, with Japan's defeat imminent, the Chinese Civil War resumed with increased intensity. During the second phase, from 1945 to 1949, the CCP, led by Mao Zedong, gained significant ground. The communists' strategy and grassroots support helped them win major battles and eventually control over mainland China. On October 1, 1949, Mao proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China, PRC, marking a pivotal shift in Chinese governance. The Qing, under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, retreated to Taiwan, establishing a separate government. This led to a complex political and military standoff that persists to this day, with both the PRC and the Republic of China, Taiwan, claiming to be the legitimate government of all China. Although direct conflict ceased after the Second Taiwan Strait Crisis in 1958 and open hostilities ended by 1979, no formal peace treaty has been signed. The Chinese Civil War not only shaped the political landscape of China and Taiwan, but also left a significant mark on international relations in the region. Its legacy is a reminder of the profound internal divisions that can influence a nation's path forward and the enduring impact of ideological conflicts. Coming up next is the Guatemalan Civil War. The Guatemalan Civil War, lasting from 1960 to 1996, marks one of the darkest chapters in Latin American history. This conflict was more than a mere battle between the government and leftist rebels. It was deeply rooted in long-standing social issues, particularly unfair land distribution. The land was largely controlled by a wealthy elite, mainly people of European descent, and included major foreign companies like the American United Fruit Company. These landowners had vast holdings and paid little to no taxes, while the rural indigenous poor toiled under harsh conditions. The early push for change came in the 1940s and early 1950s, when newly elected leftist governments began to address labor issues and push for land reforms. However, this period of progress was cut short by a coup in 1954, supported by the United States, which brought military leaders to power, starting with Carlos Castillo Armas. The actual civil war began on November 13, 1960. After a failed revolt by junior military officers against General Ydígoras Fuentes' government. Those who survived formed the core of the rebel group known as MR-13. As the decades passed, violence escalated, with the 1970s seeing increased brutality as more indigenous people and peasants joined the rebels, fighting against inequality and state oppression. During the 1980s, the military took over almost complete control, suppressing any opposition ruthlessly. The Civil War was especially brutal in its targeting of civilians, with the government committing acts of genocide in the early 1980s. Entire Mayan villages in the highlands were wiped out, and up to 200,000 people were killed or disappeared during the war, most of them during these violent campaigns. The story of the Guatemalan Civil War teaches a harsh lesson on the consequences of inequality and authoritarian governance. It highlights the need for justice and reconciliation to mend a nation deeply scarred by decades of conflict. Next on the list is the Angolan Civil War. The Angolan Civil War, which began in 1975, just as Angola was celebrating its independence from Portugal, lasted nearly 3 decades until 2002. This was not just a battle for control of a new nation, it was also a major battleground of the Cold War, drawing in countries from around the globe. The war kicked off with a power struggle between two main groups, both of which had fought against Portuguese rule but had very different ideas about Angola's future. The MPLA, People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, leaned towards communism and received support from Cuban troops and the Soviet Union. On the other hand, UNITA, National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, was staunchly anti-communist and found allies in the United States and apartheid-era South Africa. Despite early victories, including seizing the capital city, Luanda, the MPLA couldn't secure peace. UNITA, led by Jonas Savimbi and supported by its international allies, retreated to the south and east and continued a fierce guerrilla warfare. This resistance split the war into three major periods of intense fighting: the initial struggle from 1975 to 1991, a brief yet chaotic conflict between 1992 and 1994, and the final battles from 1998 until the war's end in 2002. The fighting was brutal and left deep scars on Angola, not only through the loss of life and displacement of people, but also by severely damaging the country's infrastructure and economy. By the time the MPLA claimed victory in 2002, the war had claimed between 500,000 and 800,000 lives and forced over 1 million people to flee their homes. Today, Angola still bears the physical scars of this conflict, with landmines hidden across the countryside, posing ongoing danger. The social and cultural impacts are profound, as the war disrupted traditional community ties and religious practices, leaving lasting effects on Angola's societal fabric. Up next, we have the American Civil War. The American Civil War, a defining struggle that erupted just as the United States was grappling with its identity, spanned from 1861 to 1865. This war was not merely a dispute over territorial boundaries. It was fundamentally a battle over the future of slavery in the nation. Following the election of Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the spread of slavery into new territories, tensions reached a climax. His victory led to the secession of 7 southern states, which established the Confederate States of America, a new government committed to the institution of slavery. The immediate spark for war was the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, plunging the nation into a lengthy and bloody conflict. The Union, consisting of the northern states, and the Confederacy, comprising the southern seceded states, clashed in numerous battles. Initially, the war aims of the North focused solely on reunification, but with Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, abolishing slavery became a central objective. This proclamation declared all slaves in Confederate areas free, transforming the ethical underpinnings of the war effort. Key battles unfolded across various regions. In the Eastern Theater, the Battle of Gettysburg marked a significant turning point by halting the Southern advance into the North. Meanwhile, in the Western Theater, Union forces captured critical strongholds such as New Orleans and won decisive battles like Vicksburg and Chattanooga, effectively bisecting the Confederacy. Notable figures such as Confederate General Robert E. Lee and Union Generals Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman emerged as pivotal leaders. Sherman's notorious March to the Sea in 1864 exemplified the harsh tactics of total war, significantly weakening the Southern resolve and capability. The conflict reached its conclusion in April 1865, with Lee's surrender to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. However, the war's repercussions were profound, leading directly to the abolition of slavery and ushering in the Reconstruction era. This period was marked by efforts to reintegrate and rebuild the Southern states, and to define the newly secured civil rights of the freed slaves. Technologically, the war advanced military methods, showcasing the effectiveness of railroads, telegraphs, ironclad ships, and other innovations that would shape future conflicts. By its end, the Civil War had resulted in significant casualties. Between 620,000 to 750,000 soldiers died, with countless civilians affected. Its legacy remains a critical chapter in U.S. history, illustrating the deep divisions and eventual reconciliation within the country. The next war we're looking at is the Rwandan Civil War. The Rwandan Civil War, a conflict that stretched from October 1990 to July 1994, was deeply rooted in the long-standing ethnic divisions between the Hutu and Tutsi groups in Rwanda. This tension escalated after a revolution from 1959 to 1962 ousted the Tutsi monarchy and established a Hutu-led government. More than 336,000 Tutsis fled to neighboring countries, where some of them formed a group called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF. The war began when the RPF, led by Fred Rwigema, launched an invasion from Uganda, pushing deep into northeastern Rwanda. However, the death of Rwigema early in the invasion was a major setback for the RPF. The Rwandan army, helped by French troops, managed to push back the initial RPF attack. When Paul Kagame took over the RPF leadership, he strategically pulled back to regroup in the Virunga Mountains. From there, the RPF shifted to guerrilla warfare, a strategy of hit-and-run attacks that dragged on without a clear winner until 1992. The ongoing conflict eventually forced Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habyarimana, to start peace talks. Despite disruptions by Hutu extremists who were against any deal with the RPF, the negotiations led to the Arusha Accords in August 1993. These accords aimed to create a new government that included the RPF. After the accords, there was a brief period of peace as the agreements were slowly put into place. RPF troops set up base in a compound in Kigali, and the United Nations sent peacekeepers to help maintain stability. However, peace was shattered when President Habyarimana was assassinated on April 6, 1994. This event triggered the Rwandan genocide, during which between 500,000 and 1,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were killed in just about 100 days. In response, the RPF resumed the war with renewed intensity. By July, they had taken control of the capital, Kigali, and by the end of the month, they had captured the last areas held by the government. This victory marked the end of the civil war. After the war, Paul Kagame and the RPF took control of Rwanda. Kagame became vice president in 1994 and president in 2000. His government focused on rebuilding Rwanda's infrastructure and economy, promoting reconciliation between Hutus and Tutsis, and bringing genocide perpetrators to justice. In 1996, Kagame's government also played a key role in starting the First Congo War by attacking refugee camps in Zaire, targeting exiled leaders of the former Rwandan regime. As of 2024, Paul Kagame and the RPF remain the dominant political force in Rwanda, leading efforts to stabilize and develop the country while still grappling with the challenges of its complex past. Coming up now is the Nigerian Civil War. The Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, spanned from July 6, 1967 to January 15, 1970. This conflict broke out soon after Nigeria gained independence from Britain, driven by deep divisions within the country. The war started because of long-standing disagreements fueled by ethnic, cultural, and religious differences. These issues worsened after a military coup and violent attacks against the Igbo people in Nigeria's northern region in 1966. These attacks forced many Igbos to flee to their ancestral lands in the eastern region. Feeling unprotected by the national government, the leaders of the eastern region, mainly Igbo, decided to form their own independent country called Biafra. Biafra was led by Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. The Nigerian government, led by General Yakubu Gowon, did not agree with this secession. The government's military quickly acted to regain control, capturing key areas including oil facilities and the important city of Port Harcourt. One of the most heartbreaking parts of this war was the Nigerian government's blockade of Biafra. This blockade led to a terrible famine that caused the death of hundreds of thousands, possibly up to 2 million, of Biafran civilians, mostly due to starvation. The world learned about this tragedy through news reports showing the severe hunger faced by Biafran children. These reports brought international attention and aid, helping to establish organizations like Doctors Without Borders. Countries around the world were divided in their support. The United Kingdom and the Soviet Union supported the Nigerian government, while France, Israel, and others helped Biafra. The United States chose to remain neutral, treating the conflict as a British issue, although its decision not to recognize Biafra slightly favored the Nigerian government. The war highlighted the difficulties in building unity in African countries after they became independent. Many different ethnic groups had to find ways to live together under one government. The war ended with Biafra rejoining Nigeria, but it left the Igbo people politically weakened, a situation that affects Nigerian politics even now. Next on the list is the infamous Korean War, the Korean War, which started on June 25, 1950, and ended in an armistice on July 27, 1953, was a major conflict that divided the Korean peninsula into North and South Korea. It wasn't just a local war, but a significant chapter in the Cold War, involving global powers like the United States, China, and the Soviet Union. After World War II, Korea was split into two halves along the 38th parallel. The North was occupied by the Soviet Union and the South by the United States. Each half soon set up its own government, each claiming to be the legitimate government of all Korea. The North had a communist government led by Kim Il-sung, while the South had a capitalist government under Syngman Rhee. This division set the stage for a looming conflict as both sides wanted complete control over Korea. The situation escalated when North Korean troops, supplied and trained by the Soviet Union, invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950. This unexpected attack led to a quick response from the United Nations, which condemned the invasion. With the Soviet Union absent from the vote, the UN called on member states to help South Korea. Led by the United States, forces from 21 countries came together to push back the North Korean invasion. The war's early months saw the South Koreans and their allies pushed back to a small defensive area around the city of Pusan. But in September 1950, a bold move by UN forces landing at Incheon far behind the North Korean lines turned the tide. This brilliant strategy cut off the North Korean forces, allowing the UN to push them back and advance into North Korea. However, just as it seemed the war might end quickly, Chinese forces entered the fray in October 1950. This massive intervention pushed UN forces back into South Korea, and the fighting became a back-and-forth battle across the 38th parallel. Seoul, the capital of South Korea, changed hands several times during the war, illustrating the intense and fluid nature of the conflict. The war dragged on with neither side able to secure a decisive victory, eventually leading to a stalemate around the original dividing line. Finally, after 3 years of heavy fighting and massive casualties, an armistice was signed on July 27, 1953. This agreement created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, a heavily fortified border that remains to this day. The war had a devastating impact, with around 3 million people killed and most of Korea's major cities destroyed. It left North and South Korea permanently divided, with ongoing tensions that occasionally flare into confrontations. Despite the ceasefire, the Korean War has never officially ended and remains one of the most stark reminders of the Cold War era. Finally, we have the Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War, which unfolded between 1917 and 1922, was a complex and multi-sided conflict that erupted after the October Revolution, where the Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional government. This war ultimately led to the establishment of the Soviet Union and marked the end of the broader Russian Revolution, one of the 20th century's pivotal events. Following the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II during the February Revolution, Russia was in a state of significant upheaval. A provisional government briefly held power until it was ousted by the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin. The Bolshevik seizure of power, however, was not universally accepted, leading to a civil war involving several groups with differing visions for Russia's future. The main forces were the Red Army, fighting for the Bolshevik vision of a socialist state, and the White Army, a diverse group consisting of monarchists, nationalists, and other political movements opposed to Bolshevik rule. Other groups, including Ukrainian anarchists, left socialist revolutionaries, and various regional militias known as Green Armies also fought against the Bolsheviks. Initially, the Bolsheviks managed to control vast territories, but faced significant challenges. For instance, the Czechoslovak Legion's rebellion in Siberia in 1918 prompted Allied interventions in North Russia and Siberia. This resulted in a temporary reduction of Bolshevik-controlled areas to mostly European Russia and some parts of Central Asia. The White Army launched multiple offensives in 1919, but by the end of the year, their efforts were thwarted, and they were in retreat on all fronts by early 1920. Despite the Bolsheviks' military successes, the aftermath of the war saw the fragmentation of the former Russian Empire, as many non-Russian ethnic groups declared independence. The war concluded with the Bolsheviks' control solidified after capturing Vladivostok in 1922, though isolated anti-Bolshevik resistance, such as the Basmachi movement in Central Asia, continued into the 1930s. The conflict was brutal, resulting in an estimated 7 to 12 million casualties, mostly civilians. The Russian Civil War profoundly influenced the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century, leading to the establishment of the Soviet Union and shaping the early Soviet states' policies and structure. Thank you for joining us on this journey through some of the most intense and significant civil wars in history. Each conflict we explored not only shaped the nations involved, but also left lasting impacts on global politics and society. If you found this series enlightening, don't forget to like, subscribe to us, and turn on notifications for our channel to keep up with more fascinating historical insights.